And we're back. Welcome to the server virtualization with System Center and Hyper-V Jumpstart. Here with Corey Hines and System Center Simon Perryman. For those of you that are joining us from yesterday, welcome back. And for those that are here today, welcome to the event. Certainly got a full action-packed day today. We're going to be getting into a lot of different things. But first of all, for those of you that weren't here yesterday was a pretty good day. A lot of foundation work on Hyper-V and Microsoft's core virtualization infrastructure. So to give you a sense of what we covered, so that if you weren't here, you can go back and look at those videos and the recordings eventually. We began with a look at how we evaluate an environment for virtualization. So things like the map toolkit and all the different components and tools that go with it. We then moved into installing, configuring Hyper-V. So how we add the role, how we manage Hyper-V, things like the PowerShell providers, things like the MMC consoles, then moving into things like virtual hard disks, virtual machines, and checkpoints. And so some good information there on things like V1 virtual machines versus V2 virtual machines, or I should say Generation 1 versus Generation 2. Gen 1 versus Gen 2 virtual machines. What the differences are, why they're important, VHD versus VHDX, and then how we work with checkpoints, which is the new term that's been adopted for snapshots to make it more consistent. Module 4 covered virtual machine networks. So looking at things like switches, private switches, internal switches, external switches, and also a bit of an intro to network virtualization. Pretty big topic, pretty complex topic. We're going to spend some time on it today as well.
That's right.
Moving into Module 5, we covered Hyper-V replica and things like shared nothing live migration, quick migration, replica, extended replica, and also storage live migration. So moving VMs around essentially from anywhere to anywhere with no downtime, and then end of the day with a pretty good discussion on failover clustering. Saw some demos on how to build a cluster, how to configure a cluster, and also move into things like scale-out file servers, which are a huge new capability that was introduced in Windows Server 2012. Today, we're focusing on the next level up in the stack, which is the System Center components. So with Hyper-V, obviously, you get the core hypervisor, you get all the functionality, but from an enterprise management viewpoint, it's challenging to manage a lot of Hyper-V servers unless you have some broad framework that's going to, both automate and administer everything. So, management, monitoring, automation, deployment, all these different tasks. And so to that end, we've got a pretty full day today that focuses on primarily Virtual Machine Manager, but also other components of System Center. So we're going to begin today installing Virtual Machine Manager, looking at how it's installed, the core components, things like the agents, how they're deployed, and how you get an SCVMM infrastructure up and running. We're then going to move into basic System Center management. So how we navigate the UI, how we deploy the most common tasks, like, for example, adding Hyper-V hosts, adding clusters, adding file servers, all those different components and tools. Module 9 is managing the library. Now, what makes VMM great is you can basically deploy services, virtual machines, operating systems with the single click of a button. And this is all done through the library. The library is a collection of objects, things like profiles, operating systems, templates that represent business objects that we can deploy through Virtual Machine Manager. We then move into creating and managing individual virtual machines. So once we've defined the library, actually deploying VMs through Virtual Machine Manager. Once that's done, look at clouds, right? When we think about cloud, we think about the idea of tenants. Tenants are delegated roles that allow you to take logical groups of resources and split them up and keep them isolated. VMM introduces this concept of clouds. So how we define a cloud, build a cloud, and administer a cloud. And then finally, moving into managing collections of VMs that represent services, right? Maybe a service is an application that consists of both a front end and a back end. Maybe there's a data layer, a business layer, and perhaps a web application layer. So how we define services and then scale out services, scale them back, add elasticity, and then finally protection and monitoring. And so at that point, we'll get into things like System Center Data Protection Manager, System Center Operations Manager, and some of the other components of the all-up System Center suite. So, without further ado, let's meet our presenters for the day. So with me we have System Center Simon Perryman.
Thanks, Corey. Hi, everybody. I'm Simon. I am a Microsoft technical evangelist based out of headquarters in Redmond. I've been at Microsoft about 6.5 years now, coming up close to 7. I spent 4 years of that on the high availability engineering team. So hopefully you guys got a lot of good insights about clustering yesterday. And now my focus is all on System Center Private Cloud as a technical evangelist. I have several patents. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer, VMware Certified Professional, MCSE, so great certification, the Microsoft Private Cloud one. And this will actually give you some good training and best practices for this private cloud certification as well. And delighted to come and present. This is maybe my 8th, 10th jumpstart. I've even done a few with Corey, so I'll hand it back over to Corey to introduce himself.
Absolutely. So my name's Corey Hines. I'm a technical old guy.
Okay, technical old guy.
I've been around quite a while, doing everything from, began my career doing database development, eventually moved into virtualization, and spent the last 10 to 15 years focusing on core infrastructure, virtualization solutions, primarily on the Microsoft stack, but also on other, comparable sort of products as well. Did some work with VMware, some work with Citrix over the years. Presently own a hosting company, and we do hosting for a very specific scenario, labs, demos, things of that nature. So we run that out of our own data centers. We have our own software that does it. And so my life every day is file servers, clusters, Hyper-V, System Center. These things we're talking about here is what I do on a daily basis. Getting into some pretty interesting and sometimes crazy scenarios. So today we'll be doing a lot of work with System Center. Simon, you're going to be leading a lot of the discussion today.
Yep.
I'll be helping out and adding in some stuff when I can and where I can. So let's take a look at what our next step is here.
Thanks. So just to kind of set some expectations about the course, this is really designed for IT professionals that are focused on virtualization. Now, even if you're brand new to System Center and System Center Virtual Machine Manager, we'll make sure that we cover the basics today. So on our first module, we're actually going to do a very, very quick overview of all the different System Center components that may get asked about on the exam. Just kind of a quick introduction to the UI. And the reason for that is we look at a lot of integration points throughout the rest of the day, looking at how Virtual Machine Manager can do backup, how it can be monitored by Operations Manager, how it can be automated through Orchestrator. So we kind of want to level set, and this first module will really kind of build a foundation for the rest of the day. Then we're going to focus almost exclusively on VMM, and again, we'll cover the basics, going through all the different features. So if you've done VMM in the past, you'll learn about the new stuff. If you're brand new to VMM, you'll learn about the full product as well. Now, we have some additional training that's available as well. We have a 5-day version of this course that's a mock course, Microsoft Official Curriculum. And then, of course, this is all to prepare you for the exam, 74409. And we had a few questions yesterday. Will just taking this course give you enough information to prepare you for the exam? Maybe not, right? It's tough to say based on your own skills. So what we really encourage you to do is, take this training or take some other official Microsoft training. But that doesn't replace real hands-on experience. That's where you're really going to understand the features, how they work. And rather than just being able to answer questions from the book, you'll be able to logically work out how to actually fix that yourself.
It's pretty important to spend the time actually doing this stuff. I mean, a lot of the things that are in here are conceptual, granted. And knowing what the capabilities are is pretty important. But at the end of the day, unless you go out and actually do this, you have no way of actually making it all click in your head. I spent a number of years teaching and doing teaching Microsoft courses as an MCT myself. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I always stressed to my students was, look, it's fine for me to explain it to you, and you can put the facts back to me. But there's two things. Number one is, if you see anything that's outside of what we've talked about, you're not going to understand it. Yep. And two, when the time comes to actually do this in the real world, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So you've got to take the time just to go do it. And even if you don't fully understand what you're doing, it will all eventually click over time.
Great point, great point. Now, one resource that we have made available that I encourage you to check out if you do want some hands-on experience is the TechNet Virtual Labs. And you can go directly to the link by visiting aka.ms/sclabs. If we could jump to the screen here. And this will take you to our TechNet Virtual Lab Center. And this gives you dozens and dozens of labs covering System Center 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2012 R2. And how are these actually hosted? Could you just give us a quick overview of what actually happens if I go launch one of these labs?
Well, at the moment, I'm terrified that everyone on the chat's going to go try to launch something. And there isn't that much capacity allocated.
You've got limited capacity, so don't everyone jump at once. This is to kind of save for your training later.
Say this is for later, not for now. We host these through a platform that's similar in concept to System Center, using a model similar to the idea of service templates that you're going to talk about to deploy these on demand. And they're provisioned out based on average utilizations over a long period of time. And yes, that's kind of where they come from.
Great. And one more time, that address for the short link is aka.ms/SC Labs for System Center Labs. That will again take you to this page, so a great hands-on resource. Don't everyone go at once, though. We don't want to take down any more websites this week.
Yeah, we already took down one yesterday. So.
All right, well, we'll now get started and kind of go through this content here. So what we're going to be covering specifically within this first module here is really just kind of look at the foundations of System Center. Within the first module, how we set it up, and take a quick look at some of these other different System Center components. Now, one thing that's kind of an important change with the release of System Center 2012 is the fact that everything now comes under a single license. So if you've ever done System Center in the past, you would actually purchase VMM as one product, Config Manager as a product, Operations Manager as a product, and they were actual individual technologies. What we've done with System Center 2012 is now integrate them and release them as a single product. And now Operations Manager, or VMM, is considered a component within the System Center product. So perhaps a better way to draw a parallel to this is like System Center is now like Windows Server. Windows Server has Hyper-V, file services, clustering, Active Directory. System Center is now a single product that has VMM, Operations Manager, Configuration Manager. So you kind of got to make a mental shift. And what's been really great about this new change in licensing is you now get all of these tools that you otherwise would have to buy separately. So even if you maybe aren't sure that you want to do self-service, or you're not sure about automation right now, if you get System Center 2012, we're giving you those tools. So it's a good way to kind of feel out these new technologies and start to kind of move towards this private cloud model.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where when you have everything, why not deploy it?
Right.
Why not put it in production? Even maybe it's not your primary thing. Maybe you've got a monitoring solution already, but if you have System Center, you have Operations Manager, why not put it out there and start getting that additional information back?
That's right. And you'll see throughout the day, one of our big investments as well is multi-platform management. So we're not just managing Microsoft products. You're going to see us convert some VMware virtual machines, manage ESXi infrastructure, manage Linux VMs. And our goal really is to support these heterogeneous environments. And so if you are considering a move over to System Center 2012 R2, you don't want to think of it as, I need to go and replace what I have. What we can do is layer System Center on top, use that as the management platform for your existing investments. And then as you start to make new investments in the Microsoft stack, you can continue to use System Center. So you really want to think of it being able to manage a diverse infrastructure, and it's not a flip over entirely to the Microsoft stack. Now, the reason why we bring that up is you're going to notice this isn't just an exam on VMM. Now, as we look at the System Center components, I'd say probably 80% is focused on VMM, but you're still going to need to know about backup, Operations Manager, Configuration Manager. And if you take any of the other Microsoft exams, such as the MCSE Private Cloud, that's going to actually ask you about all the different components as well. You do need to know Service Manager, Ops Manager. So really the message here is this is now a full suite of products, and we really want you to try to explore all of them. And as you go take these labs, go through the training, you're really going to start to see a lot of strong integration across these products. So let's now go and look at our first round, our first module, into some of our VMM deployment. And we're going to do a quick overview of these different System Center components as well. So first of all, what is VMM? I mean, I think we've hit this pretty well here. It's what we use to go and manage our fabric. And as we alluded to before, Virtual Machine Manager may be somewhat of a deceptive name now, because it really does a lot more. It manages your infrastructure, related services, as well as, of course, your virtual machines.
Now, not only that, it does deployment as well, right?
It does deployment, yep. It does monitoring. It can send alerts.
Absolutely.
It can load balance different hosts.
It does patching.
Does patching as well.
So as an example, we recently took an order of servers in that we worked with our OEM, so we knew what the bare metal management IP addresses were when we got them as the kind of group, a cube of 10 servers. And because we knew all this stuff in advance, we were able to tell Virtual Machine Manager, hey, this is what we're expecting. So when those servers came in, plugged a few power cables in, plugged a few network cables in, turned them on. We didn't turn them on. We used VMM to power them on.
Nice.
VMM told them to Pixie boot, dropped an operating system on there, and with essentially one click of a predefined PowerShell script, we had 10 servers installed, domain joined, Hyper-V, ready for production. VMM did all of that. Power, like manages the power. I mean, that's just fantastic.
Very cool. So don't get misled by the name. Think of VMM as Virtual Data Center Manager.
Yeah.
I know. I don't want to mislead people here too much. The branding police will get on me. So that's kind of a brief overview of VMM. You know, we've covered everything here. A lot of enhancements as well. A lot of big investment area. And we'll spend a lot of time going through VMM. Now, App Controller is the self-service portal for VMM. Think of it as a website that has a scope-down interface for end users. And basically, it gives you some of the controls that VMM has, but does not expose you to the underlying fabric and infrastructure. So you can deploy VMs, you can deploy services, both on-premise and up into Azure, but you can't go and actually look at the underlying clusters, the underlying virtual networks or hosts. And the intention of this is just to provide an end-user experience for customers to kind of just, you know, be able to go create VMs, deploy VMs, but not have to really worry about the underlying fabric. And we'll actually go over to our demo system and just quickly show you the interface here. Now, the demos that we're going to be using actually for the rest of the day are all built on the System Center 2012 R2 labs that I'm showing you. Now, I'm pretty fortunate in that I got a pretty powerful host here running 512 gigabytes of RAM. And so with that, I've bumped up all of my VMs to 16 gigs of RAM. So way above recommended value here.
One question for you, Simon, and this is interesting little segue, okay? Because we talk about, you know, people say, you know, all this System Center stuff, and I want to go look at it, but, you know, if you've ever installed System Center, there's a lot of stuff you got to do.
A lot of steps.
Is there a relatively easy way to go install every single System Center component in a couple of hours with almost no work?
Ooh, good question. There is actually. There's a feature. I don't know. Feature's maybe not the correct term. There's a technology called the PowerShell Deployment Toolkit. By the way, this will not be on the exam. It's just a great tip for you if you really want to kind of build your own environment. Check out this technology called the PowerShell Deployment Toolkit, or PDT. And basically, PDT is a set of scripts that you download, you run on your own server, and what it will actually do is go build out a full System Center environment for you. I actually built this System Center environment using it. And basically, you go through a XML file, replace some variables with local addresses in your own file system. So, you know, C, my virtual machines is where you want to store your VMs. Click Run. It will go actually download all of the binaries from Microsoft.com. It will install it. It will create security permissions, connect the products, do things like add management packs, and basically give you a fully functioning System Center environment with pretty minimal effort. I mean, we've actually been building with this, the base build, for about a month now.
Yep, absolutely. So, you know, and the coolest thing is you don't get it'll download everything for you. So you just go, hey, PDT, build me an entire network full of System Center stuff that's running and working, and I know it works. And the service accounts are done, the management packs are installed, the consoles are done, the websites are configured, the right SQL databases are configured, everything's connected the right way, and everything just works.
That's true. It includes the SQL installation as well, and that can be tricky if you're not a DBA.
Yeah, that's one of the more painfully annoying parts of setting up System Center, as someone that's installed it a bunch of times, is getting, you know, the right version of SQL Server for all the different System Center products, because they do vary a little bit. They're not all 100%. It's getting better, but they're not all 100% consistent yet.
Yeah.
And so this will go out and go, okay, here's the versions of SQL you need. Here's the coalitions you need, for example. Here's the update packs you need. Download everything, and, you know, if you've got a really fast internet connection, a couple hours. If you don't, a couple of years. And put everything on a drive, and then just start making VMs for you. It's fantastic.
It's really cool. Corey, would you actually mind posting the link in the chat for the PDT?
Absolutely.
And again, not on the exam, but just a great way to really get some hands-on experience and be able to play around with a similar environment to what I have. Now, going back to the demo system here, what I've actually done now is open up App Controller and open it up inside Internet Explorer. App Controller basically gives you kind of a scoped-down version of Virtual Machine Manager. You see what you're connected to. You could see if you're part of any clouds, if you've deployed any services, if you've deployed any virtual machines. You'll have access to your library, including all types of templates, and you get to configure settings. So again, App Controller is our self-service portal for our virtualization infrastructure. Next thing is Operations Manager, and we use Operations Manager to monitor our infrastructure. And it does diverse monitoring as well throughout the stack. So it monitors the hardware, and even different hardware components like fans, network cards. It'll manage your virtualization infrastructure, whether that's Citrix, Hyper-V, VMware. It'll manage your operating systems, your guest operating systems, your clusters, and then even those applications and services running within the VMs. So you've got pretty broad monitoring throughout the stack. And we'll switch over to our Operations Manager console. Take a quick look at that. Here we see System Center 2012 R2 Operations Manager. First thing you're going to notice here is the monitoring workspace, and this kind of gives you an overview of everything that's happening in your environment. We injected a whole bunch of errors here, so we'll get some interesting information to review later. Now, Operations Manager has a concept called management packs. And management pack is essentially a collection of activities for a specific product. And it's going to look for different metrics, different errors, different events. Based on what it sees, it will then go and raise those particular events. So for example, here is a management pack I have for VMware. It's produced by one of our partners called Veeam, and it will specifically go and monitor your VMware ESXi infrastructure, showing you things about failed deployments, different data, show you different topologies, and actually build up a topology map for you. So you really want to continue to think about Operations Manager as an extremely diverse monitoring tool.
One of the great things about Ops Manager, from someone that, we've deployed it, obviously, it will find things you didn't know were wrong.
That's true.
It's terrifying. The first time you deploy it and you go, all right, go look at it. You come back the next day and you look and there's just this litany of red X's, and it's like,
oh boy,
yeah, like,
I got some work to do.
I thought this stuff was all correct, and it's just, and you look at it and you go, wow, I didn't even know those errors were important, and because I've not gone through the event logs in that level of detail. So it's, the first time you do it, it gives you back a lot of really good information, and just be prepared.
Nice.
It looks at stuff you would have never thought to look at that is actually worth looking at. So
definitely some good best practices. And we're not going to be covering System Center Advisor today, but System Center Advisor is actually a free product which goes and complements Operations Manager. Essentially, Operations Manager does real-time monitoring. It goes and tells you when there's an active problem. System Center Advisor will do proactive monitoring, and it's basically going to go and scan your data center, looking for best practices that are not being followed. And again, I'm going to emphasize this, it is completely free. You do not need System Center 2012 or a System Center 2012 license. The advantage of having that is that you can go and integrate the Advisor data within Operations Manager. But again, it's standalone. So
one of the questions that's come up here a bunch of times is, System Center, are they licensed separately, or is it just one license for System Center?
Single license. So let me quickly cover the different System Center licenses. You're not going to be asked I'm pretty sure you're not going to be asked licensing questions on the exam. We try to keep them technical. But with the System Center license, you have the Data Center Edition. And that's the big one, and that's what we encourage people that are going to be highly virtualized to use, because it gives you some, as far as the number of VMs you can manage, the number of hosts you can manage, it's unlimited, similar to the data center license for Windows Server, where you can deploy an unlimited number of guest VMs on that single license. So if you're going to be highly virtualized, you want a data center license. Now, there's also the standard edition license of System Center, and that gives you all the different components as well, so you still get VMM, all those other things, but it's more limited in the number of VMs and hosts you can manage. So if you're not highly virtualized, yet you still want Operations Manager, DPM, all those components, you can get the standard edition. Now, there are also a few different client editions, and those only sell Configuration Manager, or only include Configuration Manager and Endpoint Protection. So if you're only doing client management, you would go for that. But I'm assuming everyone here, since this is a server virtualization course, we want to think about VMs, and so we're going to be doing everything with our data center license. And you can generally assume if there's a question about licensing lots of VMs, the answer is going to be data center.
Absolutely.
Good point, Corey, there. So next component that we're going to quickly talk about is System Center Service Manager. System Center Service Manager really serves kind of two core functions. First of all, it provides a help desk. So you do incident tracking, incident reporting, and it's built using the ITSM, IT Service Management principles, built on top of ITIL, IT Infrastructure Library, built with MOF, Microsoft Operations Framework. Now, I just threw out a lot of acronyms for you, Bottom line is it uses industry standards to actually go and manage your help desk. So you have things such as problems, incidents, work items, configuration items, and it uses a configuration management database as well.
Interesting, you can use Service Manager for a lot more than just help desk.
That's right.
It's an extremely extensible product. There's tools that let you design forms, for example, so that when an incident occurs, maybe it's not just help desk, maybe it's an alert on a storage array on your SAN. And so it can pop up, for example, a form that allows you to justify why this is full, submit it to somebody for approval to expand the SAN, to spend money or something. So you can take you can take it as is, which is very useful. Do very little and you still get a lot of value. Or you can go to an incredibly detailed level of customization with form design, with logic, with code to really build custom solutions that address anything that you want.
Absolutely. Those are what we consider the self-service capabilities of Service Manager as well. So let's quickly switch over to the demo here. And this is the System Center Service Manager interface. Now, administration, kind of covers the basics. Library allows you to reuse objects. But what we're interested in here for our help desk, our IT service management, is what we call our work items. And as you look at the interface here, pretty standard ITIL interface. You have incidents, problems, release management. Now, as Corey was mentioning here, it also provides you with self-service capabilities. As I go to my library, we have this concept of a service catalog, which contains requests and services. And essentially, these are different offerings from the IT department that we can go and publish through a self-service portal. So what I've actually switched over to here is a different virtual machine showing our self-service portal for Service Manager. And from here, you can see we have a lot of different things, and they're not just virtualization related here. So, we can create a VM, but we can submit generic incidents. We can add tenants. And so essentially, this is a highly extensible self-service portal that is not dependent on VMM. So we often get a lot of questions. You have App Controller for self-service. You have the Service Manager portal for self-service. Which do I use? Is there some overlap? And the answer to that is yes, there is overlap. Both of them can make requests for your virtualization infrastructure. Now, the difference here is App Controller is much easier to set up. However, it's much more limited because it only works with VMM. It only allows you to go and interact with VMM to provision private cloud, or to go interact with Azure to go and provision to public cloud. The Service Manager Service Portal can interface with anything. So any other System Center component, any other data center component. And what it can actually do is once you go and create a request, it will then go publish this request inside Service Manager, and this can go even trigger automated activities. And these automated activities will do things such as add somebody to Active Directory. It could go provision a new VM.
Yep.
It could go open a new service request, close a service request, go trigger anything else. So long as there's a programmatic interface, meaning some type of script or function, we can go integrate with these different components.
At the end of the day, it's IT lifecycle management, which includes virtual machine management, right? So virtual machine management would be one facet of IT lifecycle management, but that includes things like, hardware, things like user counts, permissions, databases, stuff HR might do. It can address all of that.
Absolutely.
One of the common things I often get asked when we talk about System Center to people is, should I become an expert in System Center or an expert in a particular product? And the answer is you can kind of do both. Every single one of these products that's in here has enough functionality in it that you could spend an entire career on Ops Manager, on VMM, on Service Manager, on Orchestrator. If you really wanted to become an expert in that product, and depending on the level of complexity that and the size of your organization, that may be necessary. So certainly there's enough there that you could spend an entire career being an expert in Service Manager and still not reach the bottom in terms of what all the capabilities and the things you could possibly do are. There's a lot in there.
It is, and you actually bring up a good point here about, a lot of the overlap, a lot of the interconnectedness between these products. Now, I'll give you a little bit of insight onto the engineering side of System Center. Now, in the past, System Center had individual engineering teams for each of the products. So, Operations Manager had its own team, kind of siloed. VMM had its own team. We acquired a company called Opalis, which became Orchestrator, so its own engineering team. And with our older releases, you notice the products were somewhat staggered, right? You had VMM 2008 R2, Service Manager 2010, Configuration Manager 2007. And so they kind of came at separate intervals. And integration between those pieces worked, not necessarily great. Now, that was the older version, and since 2012 came out, we've realigned with this goal of making it a single product. Our engineering teams have consolidated, so we have single management. Our release cycles and our development cycles have consolidated. Everything's being built on a single framework using PowerShell. So our APIs are consolidated, our scripting is consolidated. And at the end of the day, this is going to give a more integrated, better functioning product. And we're seeing some of our competitors in the cloud management space. Now they're really trying to catch up with us. They're acquiring these individual components, things similar to Orchestrator or similar to Operations Manager, but they're still being run by different teams, different organizations, and these parts don't really fit together as well yet. So this is something that is a big competitive advantage of System Center, and you're going to see throughout future releases as well, even tighter integration across these products. Now, next component we're going to cover here is System Center Orchestrator. My favorite new product.
I
is
love it.
Amazing.
Absolutely love
it's like one of the best things we've added in years, at least on the data center side.
Absolutely, because one of the biggest challenges that has always been there is how do you automate the data center?
These diverse systems as well, right?
Knowing the individual automation capabilities of everything from each individual product that's involved, VMM, Service Manager, Operations Manager, all these different pieces. And then if you take the average, guy that needs to automate the data center, they're not coding experts, right? They're, for them, it's download a PowerShell script, edit it, and then wonder why it didn't run properly.
Right.
That's reality. I'm not, I'll respect everybody, but that's what typically happens. Give me a nod in the chat if you agree with me. What Orchestrator does is it makes scripting graphical. So you can now do flowchart style design,
like Visio.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to go from a user account into a database. You can draw it and draw arrows, and it worries about the code for you. Now, certainly understanding conditional logic, looping, things of that nature helps as you build these things and make them more complex. But simply taking a user account, provisioning it to Active Directory, making a new VM, and assigning it permission, they become graphical steps where you just click them, draw arrows, configure properties, and worry about it to actually do all the work and automation. Failing, it'll take care of the failback if something goes wrong, does all that for you.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, really, best way I describe it is integrated graphical scripting, tying together all of these diverse systems. And that's a big advantage Orchestrator has, giving you the ability to pass parameters from one set of activities to another set of activities, even if they're completely independent functioning systems. So let's take a quick look at our demo here.
Before you do that,
yeah,
integrated graphical scripting, I think my head just exploded.
That's the easy way to describe it. So what you're going to see here with Orchestrator, we're actually showing what we call the runbook designer here. And this is what we use to go and actually build our different workflows. Now, to give you a quick view of the interface here, we have some organizational navigation panes on the left. On the right, we have what we call our integration packs. And within an integration pack, we have what we call activities. Now, an integration pack is basically a collection of different actions for a specific system. So we can take a quick look at some of the ones we've added here. We have some system variables. We can do some monitoring, file management, email. Well, then you can see integration with third parties like Cisco UCS, F5 load balancers, Team Foundation Server, SQL, Exchange, Azure. Going down the list here as well, we have we have all the other System Center components. We have third-party management systems, so HPILO, Active Directory, DPM, VMware vSphere, Exchange, SharePoint. So pretty rich set of components here.
And so when you select one of those components, it's going to let you configure properties specific to that product. So, for example, you don't need to know what all the information is you would need to supply to make a user, for example. It presents you, just type stuff in here that you need.
Absolutely. So, let's take a VMware vSphere activity. We'll go drop it into this new runbook. It's loaded. We can go say, I don't know, add a new disk, clone a VM. I'm just kind of making one up on the fly here. Connect the dots. Go configure some properties for this disk. So what's going to be the name of this disk? What's going to be the path of the disk? What is going to be the size of the disk? Then we could go and trigger this. And so every time a specific set of metrics are met that goes and triggers this workflow will run. So, and again, you can pass these parameters between all of these diverse systems. So, here's a quick sample run book that I built that looks at checkpoint management. Some things that are interesting to note here are you have conditional statements. If it passes, do this. If it fails, do this. You could go split activities based on variables. You can go right to event logs. So if one of these workflows fails, Operations Manager can go detect the error. So a very rich set of tools here. And then Data Protection Manager. Data Protection Manager is basically our backup solution, protecting our hosts, our virtual machines, and our other infrastructure. And as we go take a quick look at our DPM environment, say a relatively simple interface here. You get monitoring information. You could go protect disks, go recover disks, or services or VMs. There's some reporting capabilities with pre-created reports. Then you could go add new disks that you want to use for protection.
I'm actually a real big fan of DPM. I think as a backup product, quite thorough, quite good. Now, certainly not as robust as some of the partner products that are out here. You mentioned some of the stuff that Veeam does, for example.
Yep.
But as a product you get with System Center, very, 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 very powerful. And I think a lot of people just kind of write it off and assume it's not good enough. We use DPM for our primary backup solution, and it's fantastic. I mean, we run it against SharePoint servers, against SQL databases, everything. And that very easy self-service granular restore. You upload the wrong file to SharePoint, give me the version from a couple of hours ago. Just DPM just has it. It's awesome.
Nice. And it, of course, supports backup for all the other System Center products. So I guess something else that we have not mentioned yet is that all of the System Center products are run using a SQL database. There's no local database, JetDB database. Everything uses SQL Server Full Edition. Now, in the previous releases of System Center, it actually used SQL Server Express. With this release, we're using SQL Server Regular Edition, Standard Edition. And when you get a System Center license, you also get that SQL Server license. So you don't have to worry about any additional acquisition costs to actually go and be able to run System Center. That license is included in the suite. Now, the final component that we're going to cover here is the Windows Azure Pack. We talked about this briefly yesterday. Windows Azure Pack is essentially Azure services that run in your own data center. So if you like the familiar look and feel of the Azure web portal with a gallery of images, easy to set up virtual machines or websites, you can do that yourself now using your own on-premise resource with the additional control that you have of the fact that you're running it yourself. So you can get past some of the limitations or restrictions around running a VM or a service up in Azure. Now that wraps up the first lesson. Now we're going to start to focus a little more on VMM.
Okay. So our next module here, our next lesson deals with specifically, man, I'm having a hard time with that this morning, Virtual Machine Manager. Start by taking a look at what it is, what it does, where it comes from, and then the concept of fabric management. This is a new concept for VMM that started with, I think, 2 versions ago. And if you start thinking about Virtual Machine Manager, what you've got to remember is that it's not about just virtual machines. It's about all the supporting data center infrastructure that allows virtual machines to be possible. So this includes everything. This includes switches. It includes load balancers. It includes storage, file servers, fiber channel arrays, and the individual hosts and host clusters themselves. So all these things together make up what's referred to as the fabric for Virtual Machine Manager. We'll then take a look at the architecture so you kind of understand the idea of, most System Center products use this central management service and agent model, as VMM does. We'll take a look at how that works, and then take a look at some topology options. Do you have, one VMM server? Do you have a cluster of VMM servers? And how does that all kind of work together?
So with VMM 2012 R2, some of the biggest enhancements we made in this release are around performance. We're seeing huge uptake in VMM adoption, and so we want to make sure that we can scale and support some of the largest data centers. And so for each VMM management server, it supports up to 1,000 hosts and 25,000 virtual machines. Now, of course, you can have multiple servers as well. So if you have more than 1,000 hosts or more than 25 virtual machines, good for you. You can go and actually still have multiple sets, multiple instances of this. Now, under Fabric Management, what we're really focusing on here is looking at kind of the core features. So managing our network, storage, power, updates, different virtualization platforms, and then some of our bare metal deployment, which we're going to show shortly. Here's a diagram of the core VMM architecture. And in the very middle, you see what we call our management server. This is essentially the brains of Virtual Machine Manager. And through a management console, you will go and connect to this management server. Now, you can have multiple management consoles running on lots of different computers, and they can still connect to a single management server. Now, the management server stores all of its information about the different users, VMs, roles, state, all of that data that it's going to refer to inside a SQL database here. VMM connects to our different hosts, so managing up to 1,000 hosts per server, 25,000 VMs, and then it goes and pulls additional resources from the library. We'll spend some time talking about the library later. App Controller is this enhanced add-on, our self-service portal. It allows you to go and manage it through a website. And now if you want to look at the high availability architecture, you can note that VMM can be made fully redundant. Now, what we actually do with our management server itself is we can go and deploy that directly on top of a failover cluster. So not within a virtual machine running on a cluster, but directly on the failover cluster itself. It now has its own resource DLL, which means the failover cluster is aware of the different actions VMM needs to be started, to be stopped, to detect the health, detect when it's failed, and to be able to fail it over between different cluster nodes. The SQL database can be made highly available using SQL clustering. So SQL Always On or earlier versions of SQL. You know, you can still you can back up all of these different components as well using Data Protection Manager. And if you have redundant SQL databases as well, you can even do disaster recovery using them, backing up the databases, doing things such as database mirroring.
So I know this has been a particularly important point for folks that are looking at this from a very large scale, because if you're looking at investing in VMM as something that's going to manage a very large implementation, you want to know that it's going to be highly available and be redundant. And
it's important.
This capability, which is new, is fairly important in that sense. So.
Yep. And for our library servers, a library server is a file server. That can also be made highly available using file server failover clustering. So you can have multiple instances. Now, question. Can we use a scale-out file server to go and manage these library shares and all these different components within our library?
For VMM, I don't know, actually.
We're going to say the answer to that one is actually no. You don't want to use a scale-out file server. And the reason for that is it's not designed to go and handle all these individual types of files. So when you build this scale-out file server, it's really optimized to run virtual machines or to run virtual machine files, the VHD file. So you don't want to go use a scale-out file server for this. You want to go use a traditional clustered file server for this, as we're just managing regular files as in their regular objects. Now within network load balancing, within App Controller, which is our web interface, we can use NLB, network load balancer, to distribute the traffic. Going back to our discussion yesterday, when do I use clustering? When do I use network load balancing? Again, you use clustering anytime you need consistent central source of information. So we use clustering for our SQL database. SQL database is on shared storage, consistent source of information. We use failover clustering for our library server as well. So we have a single source of information. All of that data is stored on the shared storage. However, for our websites, we're not actually storing data on those individual website VMs. They're still connected to Virtual Machine Manager, which is connected to SQL. So those actual websites, the App Controller web portal, that can use network load balancing. All it is an access point. It's not actually sharing data within that particular server. So we just can go deploy multiple instances for redundancy and to help distribute clients as they go and access these different App Controller servers. So this kind of puts together this different topology here, right? We've got our different servers, got our different hosts, but then we can also think about extending up to the public cloud. Now, we support Windows Azure through App Controller, and so using the same web interface, we could go and deploy our virtual machines on-premise and up to Azure. And a little later today, we're even going to talk about a third option for App Controller, which is deploying it to a service provider's data center. So if I run out of capacity in my own data center, I want to start using whole systems to go and scale out. I can actually manage my own VMs, get reporting data, operate them even though they're running in someone else's data center. It's basically hosting as a service this enables.
Absolutely.
While still getting, their own rich monitoring capabilities.
So moving on to our next lesson here, take a look at how we add this concept of hosts and host groups. Host groups are a particularly important concept to understand within Virtual Machine Manager, because the temptation for a lot of people would be to just have one host group and dump all their hosts in there. But the way you organize your hosts into groups comes into play down the road as you begin to define clouds, policies for power management, policies for dynamic optimization, and things of that nature. And then look at deploying Hyper-V to a bare metal computer.
Yeah, you've been mentioning that a few times. I've actually got a demo to show people as well.
Absolutely.
So first of all, what are host groups? Host groups are essentially a management unit within Virtual Machine Manager. It allows you to organize your different infrastructure servers. So how do people organize them? Some people do them based on geography. So I have one data center, that's host group 1. Second data center, host group 2. Now this allows me to delegate, do things such as, provide specific admins access to only one data center or only the other data center. Another way we see people organize host groups are things such as clustering. And so they can organize them based on the actual function for that particular group of servers. Another way people do it is based on the actual hardware, the different types of systems. So maybe high performance using fiber channel is one host group. That's where we're going to put our production systems. Maybe we then have a second host group that uses some older servers and iSCSI. Maybe that's a testing environment. So we have a lot of different organizational ways to go and plan these host groups.
Yeah, there is no right or wrong way to do it, quite frankly. It's whatever works for you. However you think about logically managing all your hosts, the host group model allows you to mirror that.
Now, what do you do when you go organize host groups? What's kind of some ways that you've gone and planned that?
The most common way is by technology. So it's based on hardware performance capability. That's typically how I see it done. I don't see geography that often, although sometimes, and you can actually nest host groups as well. So you can have geography, then group, then function. But typically it's based on the capability of the host group is most commonly what I see done.
Great. Now, final topic before we jump to some demos here is looking at doing bare metal deployment. Now, key thing here with bare metal deployment, as Corey mentioned earlier, is you could really provision things end-to-end, from literally having a brand new server dropped off in your data center, plug in those redundant power supplies, redundant internet connections, and then you can go and provision this, add it to your infrastructure, and then even, once you've provisioned a host, even make it highly available by adding it to a cluster. Now, rather than kind of walk through the steps, let's actually show them. We'll jump over to our first, or our next demo here. And what we are doing here is taking a look at the Virtual Machine Manager interface. Now, what we're going to do here under our Fabric, and again, as we kind of look at the different workspaces, we're going to spend quite a lot of time in VMM. Fabric is our infrastructure. So think of Fabric as core infrastructure, storage, network, virtual machine hosts and clusters, and then those supporting components. So you may get some questions on the exam. Which workspace would you navigate to do this particular task? If it's anything related to the infrastructure, the answer is going to be Fabric. If it's related to virtual machines or services, basically things that run on top of the infrastructure, that's going to be in your VMs. And if it's anything related to a template or building some type of standardized practice that will be reused in the future, that's going to be under library. So in this case, we're going to go and provision some bare metal clusters. So where would that be stored under? That's going to be done under the Fabric workspace because we're touching our infrastructure. So let's go ahead and say we want to go and add some resources here. We're going to go add some Hyper-V hosts. Now again, this is a server that I've just plugged in. I actually think there's about 30 in this array here that are plugged in. So we're going to say I want a physical computer to be provisioned as a virtual machine host. Now, next thing it asks me to do is provide a runner's account. So this is pretty standard. But what I want to really highlight here is this concept of a baseboard management controller, or a BMC. Basically, a BMC is kind of like a lightweight operating system that's installed by the OEM that allows you to do some basic functionality. So once you connect it to a network, it can get an IP address. You could go and send commands to it. It could go and actually monitor some of the hardware, such as the memory, the networks, the hosts. And using that interface, this BMC, we can then go and make it Pixie boot, go add an image. So we're basically almost interacting with this as kind of a pre-operating system before we actually add our own operating system on top.
So, you know, in reality, in the Dell world, that's iDRAC, and in the HP world, that's ILO.
Thanks. Yep.
I don't know what Cisco or IBM call it, because I don't own any of their gear, but that's for those of you that actually have that gear. Dell's iDRAC is what does this, and HP's ILO is what does this.
Right. So what we're basically doing here is we're going to go speak to this BMC, and we'll select what protocol we want to use. It uses the standards IPMI and SMASH. That could be a question here. You know, occasionally we do get questions around protocols, what protocol to use. So it is a good best practice here to understand the different BMC protocols we support, the different networking protocols we support, as well as the different storage protocols.
At the end of the day, the protocol you choose is going to be what the hardware vendor tells you to choose. For example, the Dell iDRACs do IPMI quite well.
Thanks. So after we've gone and said how we're going to go communicate with this bare metal server, we then get to go provide either that specific IP address that baseball management controller got, and this it received it from a DHCP server that was on the network. And then I get to go and paste in some IP address ranges if I want. And what this means is the particular server I'm looking for is somewhere within this range. So it's going to go scan, and here's the 30 or so servers that I have available for deployment based on that IP address. And I could go and deploy multiple servers at once. So if I wanted to go provision 30 servers at the same time, easy to do. Just do select all. But we'll keep it simple here and just select the first one. Now it then asks me what host group we're going to go and put this in. We'll go back to our host group demo shortly. Then it goes and asks us for customized information for this particular server. Now remember, up to this point, we've basically been assigned a random IP address, and then there's no Windows management system on top of this bare metal host. So what we are now able to do is provide that Windows-related information so that it can be up and running in our infrastructure. So I'm going to go type in the computer name here, call this Contoso HV01. We could go use a default MAC address, or let me go paste in this predefined one. And then we can continue using the existing IP address, or we can go and add a new one. And in this case, I'm going to go and paste in our existing one. So no changes there. But we have gone and provided it with a name, so that once this joins our infrastructure, we can start actually interacting with it. Click Finish to confirm the settings, and we can now see that this host has been added, and we're starting to go and provision it. So that gives us kind of our introduction to the steps to go and provision a bare metal server. But before we wrap up this module, I'm going to go and create a host group and go and add an existing server that's already provisioned. And we'll go and switch back to VMM here. Minimize app controller. Maximize virtual machine manager. All right, back to our interface here. And we'll now go ahead and start to create our host groups. Now, remember, when we're doing a host group here, we're really thinking about this as an infrastructure supporting role. So we're going to go and add this under our Fabric workspace. I'm going to say create a host group. And this is optional, not required. We'll call this Contoso. So that's simple. We now have a logical management unit. Go create a second one, and we'll call this our DR site. So that we'll go and manage our second set of resources in a disaster recovery location. So this kind of allows me to split my data center between my resources. Now, if I go take a look at all of the hosts, we see that there actually aren't any hosts that I've added to VMM now. we have our second infrastructure that's going and added that bare metal host, but we're going to go cooking show style and add one that's already been baked. So we're going to go here and say add a new Hyper-V host. We're going to this time say that this is a Windows server in a trusted AD domain. So previously we selected this physical computer deployment. Again, this is inside AD. Now, some of the other options you have here are to go and add a Windows Server computer in an untrusted Active Directory domain or in a perimeter network. Now, when you go and work with a untrusted domain, you have to go and configure some additional security and firewall settings so that we can go do that initial provisioning of our agent and start communicating with it. If you have VMM agent inside a perimeter network, you actually have to go and install the agent locally, meaning that you would go take the VMM setup component, log onto that computer locally, and install the agent manually. Now, let me take a step back here. The VMM agent. Essentially, the VMM agent is a component that gets installed inside managed computers and allows Virtual Machine Manager to go and manage it. Basically, this agent collects data from the local host, interesting data that the VMM management server cares about, such as what's the memory, what VMs are running on it, and it will go and push that information back to the central VMM server. The central VMM server goes and aggregates this information across all of the hosts that it supports, and then goes and presents it through the single interface. Now, you're going to notice that all the different system center components, for the most part, they do have agents that go and collect this data, report it back. There's a few exceptions, but those are going to be out of scope for this virtualization exam. All right, back to adding a host here. We're going to go specify the credentials that we want to use for this host. So I'm going to go select an account. Click Next. So they're going to give me the option to specify my computer by name, or to just go and scan and just go scan Active Directory. So I could go generate a search query here. So, you might get asked, hey, if you need to go find all of the different hosts in your Hyper-V or in your VMM infrastructure, how would you do that? You could go to the Find Computers option by generating an Active Directory query. Go search for all workstations and servers, because this is going to go and skip your domain controllers, things like that. Now go create an Active Directory query for you, and it'll go list all of the different servers in your environment. So you have several different options of how to actually go create and go and view this information. And so this has basically gone and providing me with all of the different hosts I have in my infrastructure. And it even shows me different clusters as well. So you're going to see us do some cluster management a little later. If there's a Hyper-V hypervisor already installed, it'll let us know about that as well.
One of the questions that's come up here a couple of times now is, can you add hosts that don't have Hyper-V?
Yes, you can. Great question. We're not going to demo that because that just kind of takes a little longer. But if you added a host that did not have Hyper-V, so let's say I selected, I don't know, this host here, we can see there's no hypervisor. So we actually go through the wizard, might even be the next screen, it's going to prompt me and say, hey, Hyper-V role may not be enabled. As part of this process, we're going to automatically install it. Please know that it's going to require a restart. Is that okay? And if we wanted to continue with this VM, we would actually go into it and it would go and add that Hyper-V role for us. Now, to save the time and to skip the reboot, we're just going to go manage one of these existing servers. And in fact, the server that we're going to go and add right now is the same server that I'm running VMM on. Now, yes, what you're saying is, wait, are you actually running Virtual Machine Manager and virtual machines on that same host? In this demo environment, I am, but this is not a best practice.
No.
Definitely not. We really want to separate our hosts and have virtualization hosts only running VMs, have management systems only running those management systems.
Now, can you run all these System Center components as VMs?
Yes, you can. And in fact, that's actually what we have here. If we go back to the interface here, you'll see that I have this single Hyper-V host. Every single System Center component is running as a VM. And there's actually some benefits to this as well, because it gives you some high availability.
Absolutely.
You know, you can live migrate the VMs while the components continue to run. If the actual VM crashes, we can restart it. The System Center service will start within it. So if you're trying to build additional high availability through the rest of your System Center infrastructure, placing them VMs is actually recommended. The only component that will run bare metal on top of a failover cluster Virtual Machine Manager. So again, VMM, best practice, run it directly on a failover cluster. Everything else, run them inside VMs. But you can run Virtual Machine Manager inside a VM as well if you want, fully supported.
Absolutely.
And that's actually what I have in my lab here. Good questions coming through. Keep them going, guys. So here we've gone and we've selected our host that we're going to add. Click Next. Get the same warning. You're actually going to see this warning every time, regardless of whether Hyper-V is already enabled or not. So don't let that trick you there. Now it asks me which host group I want to go and put this under. So we'll put this under the newly created Contoso group. It also gives me the option to go and change the default path that I want to store my virtual machines. So they're going to use the C program files, Hyper-V, as the kind of the default, unless you want to go change that. And we'll actually go configure that a little later. Skip this for now. Now, one of my favorite things about Virtual Machine Manager is that everything is built on top of PowerShell. And so as you get to the end of any wizard screen, you're going to see this option here for View Script. You click that, it will show you all of the PowerShell commandlets that have been used to go and generate this particular set of activities.
That's one of the most useful things about it because, a lot of people ask, well, I want to automate it. I want to do it a bunch of times. This is a big script wizard. Right?
So you said if you wanted to go and add, let's say you wanted to go deploy 30 bare metal servers.
Yeah. Why click through the entire wizard 30 times when you can do it once and then with a little bit of scripting knowledge, create a loop and just run the script a bunch of times. Completely supported.
And we'll actually do that a little later with creating some VMs that we do based on PowerShell. So we're going to show you how to do that, how to even integrate and launch PowerShell scripts through VMM. So some really powerful capabilities here. Another thing I find people use this for is to actually start to learn PowerShell. Right? If you're brand new to PowerShell, like any kind of scripting language, it can be a little overwhelming to get started. If you're kind of doing these operations in your head, you understand the wizard flow, what you start with and what the end result will be. By actually understanding that PowerShell commandlet that can be used to build it, it's a pretty good education tool to figure out, to do anything first I need to load credentials, then I need to create a new object. This is how variables work. So a great way to kind of ramp up with that as well. If you do want to look for additional training on PowerShell, Microsoft Virtual Academy has several PowerShell courses that are a great way to get started as well. So now we're going to go click Finish. What we're going to see now is what we call our jobs library appear. So anytime we perform a task, you're going to see this window pop up that just gives you the status of the task. We click on the task, it breaks it down to the individual pieces of that task that are being executed. So we can click on the details and see what's happening. Now there's also a tab down here called Change Tracking. Change Tracking will be used if properties or variables have actually been changed on an existing system here. Now in this case, we're just going and adding a new host, so we're not actually changing any properties on that SCVMM host itself. We're just changing the configuration within System Center. Now this is saying my host has been successfully added. It's giving me some warnings for best practice. It's been added successfully. If you want to go and now enable MPIO, go to a restart. In this case, we're not going to worry too much about MPIO. Best practice would be to use that, have that configured. So I'm going to go close the jobs window. And anytime we want to go and view the historical jobs, those get tracked down in the jobs workspace. So I can click down here, see any running jobs, see my historical jobs. And one of my favorite features as well here as well is the restart button. If any job failed, at any point you can actually go and restart that entire job and it will go and rerun that underlying script.
So yeah, the idea is you don't need to run through the wizard again. This just takes the PowerShell that the wizard produced and just says, okay, try again.
So a good example might be you're going to try to deploy a VM or deploy a cluster. It goes through step 1 through 20. And then as you're trying to create this new cluster, one particular piece fails. Maybe cluster validation fails because you're missing a particular required patch or something like that. Well, you don't want to go through that whole wizard again, go through the 20 steps. Go make that fix, and then just click restart, and it'll rerun all of that script again without having to go through that entire wizard again. All right, let's go back to our fabric. We now see under all hosts that our SCVMM server has been added. So it's online, it's healthy, and we are now stable. We've gone and added our first server to VMM. So that wraps up the first module we have here. To kind of summarize what we've done, we basically done a quick introduction to the System Center components. We started to understand some of the interconnectedness and capabilities between them. Then we've looked at some of our core virtualization infrastructure deployment using Virtual Machine Manager.
All right, so we'll take a little break here now. When we come back, we'll take a look at managing with Virtual Machine Manager and get into actually configuring different elements of the infrastructure, different types of servers and roles. So we'll see everyone back in about 10 minutes.